Randy Brown. Here
Oh,
we are again. Yep, for our second podcast. We're on a roll now, right?
that's right.
We're on a roll. So, what I when we talked, yesterday or whatever, we said, well, maybe we'd talk a little bit about AI and consciousness, that intersection between the two. What do you think? You want to still talk about that, or you got something else on your mind?
Now, that sounds like a fascinating topic.
Okay. All
And
right.
I think,
Well,
I think, especially since over the past couple of semesters, I've dealt with a few students using AI, and I've used it a few times myself, and yeah, I'm fascinated. I think the potential is amazing,
yeah.
and in both directions.
Right. Right. So you're finding, does it seem like AI just kind of came out of the blue, even, in higher education? We normally think about, higher ed as sometimes being at the cutting edge of things. We're not total sleepwalkers, but I know for me anyway, 3 months ago, I was like vehemently opposed to AI. And
Yes.
then in a conversation, everybody had their cell phones out, and I realized, wait a minute, we're already into this. So I kind of went down the rabbit hole just 3 months ago and realized how far behind the power curve I was, even though it's like still effectively new, brand new, right?
Yeah, months old.
Months old, right? So, so how did it go from being it's not even on our radar to now all of a sudden it's ubiquitous, and still people have never heard of it,
Yeah,
or even if they have heard of it, they're saying, that's 10 years down the road.
right. Trace, I remember back in my old PhD days,
Mm-hmm.
I remember neighbors in the old married student housing. The guy from upstairs, he was into computer something or another at the time. And I remember him telling me, he said, they got this thing going where you can send a line of text to somebody live
Yeah,
and they can read it.
right.
And I said, no. And he said, yeah. He said, it's just like Morse code used to be. You can send a line of text. And he said, they can be across the world.
Yeah,
And send them. And it's like Morse code. And it's going through ground wire or whatever. I don't remember what he was telling me. And, Tracy, it wasn't... and I'm just repeating history that everybody knows, but it wasn't. Maybe 5 years beyond that. Well, which was the beginnings of email,
right,
right? And
right.
I never thought about it a whole lot, but before that, we didn't even email each other,
No, no,
and we hadn't even had the thought of texting on a phone.
no.
But we didn't even email each other. You sent office memos or you wrote letters. You could type them if you wanted to. I
Yeah.
remember I had a Magnavox video writer that I was just amazed with because it was one step above an electronic typewriter.
Mm-hmm.
It had
Mm-hmm.
a tiny little screen about that big. And you could see the text as you were typing, and you could correct yourself and not have to use whiteout.
Yep.
But 5 years later, and then they had the birth of the internet in 94, 95, whatever those
Yep.
years were, and you know, I remember even thinking then you can download a picture of something that somebody put up somewhere else in the world, and yeah, it takes a little while,
Yep.
but
Yep.
you could see it just come into being. The picture did, and and like amazing. You
Yeah.
can send a family picture to your family, and here's something I just took, and I remember even thinking things like, and I'll tell you, I'm getting to the point here, but I remember, as a person who doesn't spell very well,
Hmm. Hmm.
I remember stumbling upon spell checker
Right. Right.
as the first innovation and thinking, wow, well, that's interesting.
Talk about compensating.
Yeah. And then,
Yep.
not that many years ago, it started underlining the words for me that were misspelled.
Yep.
And then uh, it hadn't even been that long ago that you could now just click on that word and it would give you the options underneath for a correct spelling.
Yep.
Then this semester, Trace, we've always had a thesaurus, embedded in Word, and
Hmm.
that was helpful to not be so redundant. But somebody sent me a document or shared a document with me on Google Drive, which was another interesting adventure. And I opened it up, and it said something about, do you want to correct this? What? And I thought, yeah, sure, why not?
Yep.
Then it checked all the grammar on it.
Right.
And so, because the person had an updated version of Word or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And so, I'm not so sure it should have snuck up on us because,
Right.
they've been embedding things in our lives the entire time. And in fact, if you think about it, we could even go back further, Trace, and just recall that, the first time they used an overhead projector
Hmm.
wasn't in a classroom, but rather at the bowling alley. And they used
Right.
floors.
Yeah, exactly. Yep.
And, and then if you go to the bowling alley now, everything's counted for you and you can't possibly cheat. You could back then because you had a wax pencil, but
Hmm.
now the accounts, everything, they've been doing this for a long time. And so maybe the leap is not as great as we think, but the leap that we're making now is just that it's in those stages where it becomes more profound
Yeah. Yeah.
in its impact on us.
Yeah. And yeah, I think you're probably right. And at the same time, I'm finding it just incredible. And like I say, we've talked before about this a little bit, but on the one hand, I'm fascinated. It's kind of like, remember that movie? I think Bradley Cooper was in Limitless.
Yeah.
I don't know if you ever saw that or not, right? You pop a pill and all of a sudden you've got these incredible, gifts and talents. And so, with Chat GPT, the 4.0, right? Or the 4, you can do some pretty amazing things. And it gives you that sense of almost limitless. You can find something really, really quick. And the only thing that I've been doing is I've been kind of testing it out based on things that I've known. So things that I know to be true, I check it. So if we're going to talk about, I don't know, factor analysis or something, right, or some kind of statistical analysis, does it come back with something that makes sense? Yeah, it does. But at the same time, it also reminded me a lot of the old ICBM days, where at 2 o'clock in the morning, you'd be the one of two crew partners still awake, pulling alert duty. And you get on the phone with the other missileers in your squadron and say, hey, you know what? Let's call our Soviet comrades in the strategic rocket forces and say, we're not going to do this nuclear stuff anymore. Because it was just terrifying what this mindless tool that we supposedly controlled could do to the world. and you know that it's just got this latent potential to destroy everything if it's unleashed, right? And that's almost how I'm seeing AI right now. Is we've already created this potential monster. Are we going to use it for good, or are we going to use it for evil? Right?
Right.
But I think I've seen the same thing that you have. You know, we've seen this tech progression coming along over the years, but now, you know, when you know, I asked ChatGPT, just for example, I said, you know, can you give me a list of the most cutting edge uses for AI and how you see it revolutionizing our world? So that's what I asked before we got on to our call. Well, it gives this list of like 10 different areas that it's revolutionizing the world: healthcare, finance, transportation, education, customer service, agriculture, manufacturing, entertainment, environmental conservation, cybersecurity. I mean, is there anything that it doesn't perceive itself as being on the cutting edge of revolutionizing everything?
Right.
You know, it's crazy. But at the same time, I also think back, you know, in '68, when the old guys, you know, like our age back then, they didn't believe we actually landed on the moon.
Yeah, that's true too.
Right.
That's right.
So,
Yeah.
so what do you think about this? You know, I was watching another guy. You know, you're probably familiar with him too. That Dr. Michio Kaku, you know, that physicist, and he said that there are only three professions, right, that AI will never replace. You know what those three are? According to, say it again?
What?
Yeah. So the first one are blue collar jobs that are non-repetitive. So they're not going to replace the plumber. They're not going to replace the garbage collectors.
Right.
They're not going to replace those guys. They're also, according to Kaku, they're not going to replace emotional jobs like professors, like teachers, like counselors, therapists. Not going to replace them. But I can tell you right now, they're already out there in terms of the GPTs for almost replacing counselors.
Yes.
You know? So, and then the other one was career fields that required imagination.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah.
And you know, Trace, your question to Chat GBT, is that what it's called?
Yep.
Is interesting because you ask it what it saw in itself.
Right.
Okay, but what's curious is that it gave you answers. But here's what I'm frightened about.
Yeah.
But the answers he gave you right now, and I should say he or she to be fair, because I don't know.
Right.
The answers that he or she gave you right now were answers that he or she got from someone else.
Correct.
Now, here's what I'm afraid, though, is what happens when he no longer has to go to the source to get that answer.
Right.
Whether that's called when it becomes self-aware. And that would even be a discussion about what do we call that, but when the machine actually understands what it is and who it is and what its potential is,
right,
rather than just looking for it in the internet or looking for what others have said.
Right.
Because it does that in an instant. But what happens when it knows it, whatever that means? And so that's what I'm afraid of, is when it gets to that point. And
exactly.
So that to me is where the curious question comes from. I like you. I asked ChatGPT something today.
Uh-huh.
Well, first I asked it to write a sermon, and I thought, well, first of all, I asked it to write a sermon in the voice of Billy Graham
Okay.
about Adam and Eve, because I thought, all right, let's just start at the beginning and see what he knows about that. Um, well, he gave me an answer, and he said I can't do that. He said,
Really?
He said I can't just verbatim quote someone. And I thought, well, okay, good for you. You got ethics.
Right.
Um,
Okay.
so then I rephrased my question, and then I said, well, write a sermon in the style of Billy Graham about the dangers of artificial intelligence.
Uh-huh.
And then he answered and became very interesting,
Yeah.
because then he equated that experience. I don't know if he remembered my first question, but he talked about Adam and Eve's experiencing or discovering knowledge
Yeah.
and the danger of artificial intelligence is the fact that we'll discover knowledge. Now, I thought that was almost a brilliant sermon or thought. Now, I don't agree with it necessarily, but I thought it was very interesting that he made that connection.
Yeah.
And especially since I said in the style of Billy Graham, so he didn't copy Billy Graham. He made some assumptions, I guess, about what Billy Graham might think about.
Yeah.
I found it fascinating that
Yeah.
he connected those two stories or two thoughts and wrote a sermon, 250-word sermon. So it's very short, because if you're going to go listen to a sermon, you want it to be good and short. And so I thought it was a well thought out sermon.
Chad GPT was already empathetic to the needs of the congregation.
Already.
Right.
I mean, and understands that apparently I like Billy Graham. And I couldn't think of anybody else at the moment that I really wanted to hear from except for Billy Graham. But anyway, thought that was fascinating to ask a question like that. But it also then made me think about, okay, so in those areas that you're talking about where we're trying to apply artificial intelligence in those areas, because see, this is where people seems like they naturally want to go with it.
Mm-hmm.
They want to attack those areas, in those three areas where it's not supposed to have the power to really do anything. They seem to want to drag it into those areas.
Right.
They seem to want to really try to answer those questions, or they want it to become Mozart. And I don't know that that's, I seems like I agree with that. How can, I'll tell you one more experience I had. I did use AI to develop a question last semester.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe I mentioned this to you, Trace. I don't know, but I asked AI to develop a question for me for a particular project in a class, the online project. I just wanted to make, partially it was an experiment because there was a student in that particular class that was using AI to answer all the questions back to me. And I didn't exactly know how to really respond to that being an issue, or even know if that was an issue. I mean, because that's the point where we're at in higher ed. Is that an issue? I'm not sure, because it depends on what you do with what AI gives you.
Yeah.
Because, and this is what I found out, AI ChatGPT built for me one of the best questions I've ever put online.
Right.
Great question. It was really good.
Yeah.
I was really proud of it. By the way, just so you know, I gave full credit where it was due, though. I told the students where I got it.
Yeah.
Partially because I had already checked, because then I turned around and I asked that same question that ChatGPT gave me. I asked it to ChatGPT. And guess what? He couldn't answer the question.
Oh.
Not to my satisfaction.
Interesting. Okay.
And the reason why is because he didn't have the human experience.
Right.
In this case of working with people with disabilities. Now, I know there's lots of things written about working with people with disabilities.
Right.
Lots of stuff's been written about it. But is that the same as doing it?
Yeah.
And do we really write about that experience of doing it? That's not how we write.
Yeah,
so when
that's
we
right.
write things professionally, we write them differently. And so ChatGPT has no idea what that is.
Yeah.
And so that human emotion part of it was gone, and he couldn't answer the question.
Yeah.
So I knew my students, if they tried to use AI to answer the question, wouldn't answer it, and they couldn't answer it that way. Although he could give some hints. But really what ChatGPT, all I could do was give me some ideas about you might do this.
Yeah. Isn't there a little bit of a parallel with what, when we were in our grad programs, it was still during that time when you had to know how to crunch numbers without either the calculator or computer, right?
That's right.
Couldn't use SPSS or SAS or anything else until you knew what you were going to get back from it. Okay?
Right.
And it's almost the same kind of thing that's happening now. And here was something else that I found interesting. I was listening to that Tom Bilyeu, for impact theory. And he was interviewing this Peter Diamandis or whatever, and they were talking about AI and the proliferation and how it was going to change the universe. And one of the things that this Tom said was, and they're talking about life's going to get weird in the next 5 years. So we're not talking about 10 years, 20 years down the road, within 5 years. And I can see that. But he said, it's going to be fine if we don't allow ourselves to become addicted. Well, I think that's already happening. And so the parallel looking at writing is the same as what statistics was back in the day, is if people aren't challenged to think independently, to crunch numbers, by hand basically, or with a calculator, and then know how to use SPSS, the same kind of thing. They become dependent on that, right? They're addicted to the technology because, frankly, it's easier. You don't have to put any sweat equity into it. Same thing that we're seeing now. If you can crack out, a dissertation basically in an evening using AI, well, how can a person not become addicted to that? And so from a sort of an academic perspective, how then do we get the person from being, just a basic fundamental learner across this bridge into being a scholar in their own right?
Yes.
You can't, because they're already addicted. So the synapses, all the wiring and everything has already been changed. Are they doing that through free will, or is that something that's happening to us? Are we being manipulated more than what we're manipulating AI and the technology?
That's a good point.
It just, it's just one of those things. You just wonder about it, because even again, back in the day, if we were going to drive cross country, well, you had a map, maybe, if you came out of the military, you had a compass as well. Right?
Usually had one right up on the dash.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Now people, even boomers like us, a lot of them can't get across the street without having GPS, because those skills that we thought were with us forever, the brain's been rewired,
Yes.
because
Now
it's
you plug
easier.
it in your phone.
Yep. Yep. And granted, I mean, things are different now. It's not like you can pull over, at any corner and find a payphone if you get lost.
Right.
Those days are gone. So maybe that's back to your question. Is it necessarily a bad thing when people are using technology to make their life better or easier?
Well, if you think about it, I don't want to think about AI necessarily in religious terms, but in a way, I kind of gravitate there.
Yeah.
So, if you ask a Buddhist straight out, is AI going to be good for us?
Yeah.
Well, he would only be able to give you one answer, which is, will it send us down the pathway of providing happiness? Is it going to give us that? Is it going to reduce the suffering?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, in as much as it could do that, then yes, it would. I mean, yes, it'll be good if it can do that. Okay, so I can see where AI applied in medicine, for instance.
Right.
I went to the doctor the other day and he said, "You're taking 14 medications. That's too many." And I said, "Can anybody tell me how 14 things are affecting each other?"
Right.
He said, "Well, probably the pharmacist can tell you more than me." Okay.
I'm just the one that prescribes it.
Yeah.
Right.
And I want to say to him, and probably the AI could tell me everything I want to know about that.
Right.
And I told him, I gave him this 10-year history, and I said, they started giving me this 10 years ago because I had a bout of gout or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, I haven't had that in 10 years. Do I still need to take it? And he said, well, let's cut it in half. Okay. Well, at least we're making steps. But, so if AI would be able to analyze things like that, that would make people's lives better. That leads us down the pathway towards less suffering. Yeah. And then I think about, I want to, if I could bring up another topic, religious topic. I'm thinking about what happened in the Methodist Church at their conference a couple of weeks ago, where they changed their policy on gay clergy. And actually, they're not the only church that's done this. They did it in the Episcopal Church years before that. The Presbyterian Church did it. I mean, every mainline denomination has done it, except the Southern Baptists at this point. Every mainline denomination, before they made that step, had made the step of allowing women priests and preachers.
Right.
The only two mainline Christian denominations that are left that don't do either one of those things are Baptists and Catholics.
Yeah, and just to interject, that's changing as well. I just talked with a Baptist friend of mine, and he said apparently it's a ways along that women are going to be allowed to be deacons or deaconesses, whatever.
They're fighting it in their annual conventions already. But I was listening. I'm just fascinated with the argument, and don't have a dog in the fight. I don't go to any of those places, but here's where the AI, I think, is interesting, or could be interesting and beneficial to religion and decisions like this. Yeah. So I heard somebody giving an argument right after the Methodist convention, talking about the 6 verses in the Bible that deal with the issue of gays. And they talked about the word used in the Bible for gay. And then they further talked about how that's this word in Greek, and how that originally it meant this, and in the context of this, and then blah, blah, and on and on and on. Now, I've heard exactly the same argument from the other side of that argument, okay?
Right.
Following the same thing.
Yeah.
But what I found interesting is I read an article recently where they found a papyrus scroll somewhere. One of those places where the volcano consumed the town. I don't remember. In ancient history, anyway. And they found this papyrus consumed, charred, and through AI they were able to translate it.
Yeah.
Adding again to the body of newly found documents relating to Scripture, adding to that body of things that we have. Well, if you take all of the things that we have, untranslated and translated, I was also reading the other day that in the Indus Valley, where part of Hinduism started, that the writings that took place in prehistory, we don't even understand.
Yeah.
Nobody's ever interpreted them. So we have no idea how that had anything to do with the Hindu faith or religion, because we can't read it.
Yep.
Well, AI could figure it out.
Yeah.
Okay, when we start figuring out all these things, then when we approach a question like, should women preach? We would have a definitive answer about what the documents say. Because then it wouldn't be an argument about that. Now, because I'm okay if you want to argue a point on social factors or anything else. If you want to argue it from that standpoint, go ahead and argue it because you're honest about your argument. But when you argue it based on a written document, you're not honest about the argument.
Right.
That's just not an honest way to fight that fight. But that's where AI could be helpful, I think, in settling those kinds of disputes, both in religious spheres, but in historical spheres, where we're trying to understand where and how something happened.
Yeah.
We could feed that information into AI and have the definitive answer. And then you can argue about that answer. But then you have to argue, you can argue on a human point, but not an actual point like they want to argue about.
Right.
And I get tired of that argument about, no, it says this in the Greek.
Yeah.
You can't argue that. No, because I know there's a right or a wrong answer. It either is or isn't this word.
Right.
So you can argue about which it is, but there's a right answer to that question. And that's what bothers me is when you get to that place where you're arguing about something that I know there's truth or there's a yes or no answer. Well, let's find that answer.
Right.
If that's the basis of your argument, then let's find that answer and we're done. But we know so many times that that's not the basis of anybody's argument.
Yeah, no, that's right.
Their argument is something else, but they want to back up an argument on either side. And I'm not playing a side here.
Yeah.
I'm just saying they want to use something to defend their side.
Yeah.
But if we're honest about our arguments, then I feel much freer to actually have a discussion with someone, be truthful about, I'm not trying to cover myself with this. I'm just going to tell you that I believe this is ethically correct. Okay, let's argue that from the point of ethics. I think AI has a problem with ethics because it can tell me about ethical theory, but it can't tell me about whether or not something's ethically correct.
Right. Right.
That's where it stops.
You know, I went back and forth with AI on this, on the topic of consciousness. And, you know, David Chalmers talks about the hard problems, of philosophy and consciousness, and the easy problems. And so I was going back in this dialogue back and forth with AI. And so it was coming up with different perceptions, right, of how we approach those questions, especially the hard question of consciousness. Not all the biochemical kind of stuff that's going on, that could possibly lead to consciousness, but more of the phenomenology, right? The subjective. What is my life like to me that kind of transcends these five senses that we have? So what's it like to be experiencing life in the day of AI? And so one of the arguments was they took kind of a pragmatic approach, right? Because part of my question was, is AI conscious? And so it comes back and it says, well, not exactly in the same way that you're thinking about and philosophically. And but one of the arguments is the closer that AI gets to responding as a human would, whether it's in some of these areas, even like imagination that Kaku was talking about, imagination or empathy, any of the emotional professions, the closer it gets to being like a human, it becomes an academic point as to whether or not there really is a separation of consciousness. It's almost like that law or that principle of successive approximations. So right now, if there's a gap in AI's ability to either to reason or to extrapolate, or to make ethical decisions, right? Is it getting closer and closer to that as it generates, right? The law of successive approximations is kind of taking over. So at some point, does it actually become sentient? Does it become conscious and aware of itself, where it really is transcendent to just the algorithms, and what it's, been taught? Because it seems like it's approaching that right now.
And our old question of whether or not it knows that,
yeah,
may not be the important question.
Exactly. Yeah. And and from a practical standpoint, if we're asking it to do something that we maybe otherwise in the past would have asked a graduate assistant or a graduate student to do, and we're going to write a particular paper, go find X number of articles, come back. Well, they come back 2 weeks later. We're getting that information back like instantaneously.
Yes.
Now. And what we're getting back, it's good stuff, right? It's stuff that you can use, and probably even better than, maybe what a graduate student could find.
Yes.
It can't do what we could do with it, but it can certainly facilitate that process and cut down the research time by a factor of 1,000. But yeah,
it doesn't. There is something that's missing at this point, because it can't make the connection between two articles that I'll make.
Right.
Because it doesn't have the experience that I have.
Yeah.
But it has a lot more information than I have.
Yeah.
So it's going to make connections that may be richer than mine, but it won't make the same one I'll make.
Right.
And so, it's like you say, it may not make any difference in the end. But here's the problem, or my problem with it. Okay, so in those areas, so like for instance, like I was saying before, there's some things that we know it'll give us a yes or no answer to, and we can trust it. That it can figure out things, factual things. It can find the answers if we give it the right information.
Yeah.
And so we can trust that. But there are other things that we're not going to be able to trust. And And the reason why we're not going to be able to trust them is because is that dark side of it too.
Mm-hmm.
I just call it dark because you can also take AI and manipulate it.
Yep.
And I can take a picture of you and make you say things you didn't say.
Right.
But make it look so real that no one can know.
Yeah.
And of course, that technology will grow to the point where you won't be able to tell that it wasn't you.
Yep. Deep fake, right?
Yes.
Yep.
And those will become better and better and better until there'll be a point at which it will actually become very dangerous.
Yeah.
Where if you want to see me in jail, you'll make sure there's a video of me committing a crime.
Yeah.
Or whatever it might be. I mean, I know that's pushing things out there, but the point is we're building a technology or equipping a technology that can be used in two different ways that are diametrically opposed.
Right.
But don't have an answer for each other. I mean, they don't counteract each other.
Yeah.
I mean,
and and you were talking before about things from a Christian faith perspective, and if Scripture tells us in the last days, good's going to be perceived as evil and evil as good, right?
Yeah,
close to that. Well, if we think about AI right now as being capable of making dichotomous choices, it's either yes or it's no. And justify whichever position it takes, you can see how that could easily be flipped, right? Because it's already inherently flipped. We've got a polarized world, we've got a polarized country, and one group is saying this is right and this is wrong, and the other is flipped the other way. So whoever really controls AI in this infant kind of stages is going to be able to shape, manipulate the rest of the masses, I think, because I think as a species, we are pretty easily manipulated.
Well, yeah.
Right?
So and that's always been the good thing about us.
Yeah.
It turns out now it's not so good.
No.
Because we've never had, there have been some powerful manipulators in our history. A lot of world leaders have been powerful manipulators.
Yep.
But there's always been a resistance to them. So there's always been a lot of people that were willing to resist, even in the darkest days in the darkest countries. There were people that would resist it, the horrific things that took place. But I think that AI is going to have the polish that you won't resist.
Right. Yeah. And another thing, when we were talking about these 10 different areas that AI perceives itself as potentially cutting edge, revolutionizing. In cybersecurity, for behavioral analysis is one of the three subcomponents. It says AI monitors, listen to this, AI monitors behavior to detect anomalies and potential security breaches. Boy, how easy could that be to manipulate? All of a sudden, they don't like something that you've said, and all of a sudden, AI comes in and says, "Oh, that's anomalous behavior. You're a security threat."
Yes.
Away you go. Then it's not a deep fake seeing Randy and Trace in jail, right? It's reality, right?
Yeah. And Tom Cruise made that movie. Was it Minority Report?
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Of course, their AI was based on a human, which is interesting in that movie. But
Right.
Yeah, and of course we do know we're already subject to such surveillance
Yeah.
by non-humans.
Right.
Uh, I mean, Facebook is not a human,
Right.
and I'm not sure humans control it anymore either. But why does it show me elephant ears, to plant when I'm
Yeah.
thinking about planting them?
Right.
And I want to say that's almost literally true.
Hmm.
It's not
Yeah.
quite literally true, but I mean, I did something, watched a video, or I did something.
Yeah.
They were
So
successful in getting me to buy some, and that
right.
was the goal.
Yeah.
And so, at what point where is the resistance going to come from? At what point are we going to resist? I mean, I didn't resist because I was actually looking for some. Okay. But what about when it tells me stuff that I really don't want?
Hmm.
What about when it starts telling me to do things I really don't want to do? When does it stop getting powerful enough to really control my behavior?
Yeah.
So right now it's observing my behavior.
Right.
We know this of studying behavior, that we know it's easy to control people's behavior.
Right.
And so when is it going to start doing that?
Yeah.
When is it going to start rewarding me for getting closer and closer approximations to the behavior it wants me to do?
Well,
I don't know, because
yeah.
it could do that without being self-aware
Right.
of whatever.
And and Randy, isn't that happening right now? So if you ask AI, to brainstorm, some topic with you. So you can ask it to brainstorm some ideas, and of course the final response back from AI is, of these choices, which one resonates with you the best, and blah blah blah, right? And so you come back and you say, all right, it's C. I'll go with what's behind door C. And then the response that comes back is it's very reinforcing, right? It's like, that is just such a great response that you've got there, Trace. It personalizes everything. It's such a great response. I think these are all the reasons, that we can go on with this option. And, so, yeah, I think there's a shaping mechanism that's already built into it. Much like what we see in, Las Vegas or Reno, casinos use it. Pavlov's dog, Pavlov would be very happy with them.
Yeah.
Yep. So the conditioning is definitely a part of it. And the more that we get sucked into that, and the more that we personalize it, and it's no longer a tool. Now it's my research assistant, right? Or it's my whatever.
Well,
I think
that's one of the things that concerns me about the thought of putting AI into a body, or into, a doll or a fake body, a robot. That concerns me about that, because we're already too close to forming relationships with AI.
right.
And you put it in a form that just looks human.
Yep.
Trace, I used to have that mannequin in my office.
Mm-hmm.
And if you walked in there, and you didn't know he was there, or wasn't used to it like me,
Yep.
you felt the presence of a person.
Right.
Just because it has the form of a human,
Yep.
you felt the presence of a person. And my sister used to have a big bulldog, and when he was around the corner, you could hear him breathing real heavy. And if you didn't know about the bulldog, you would just feel the presence of a person.
Right.
And if you take AI and put it behind a disguise, then your brain automatically interprets that as a person.
Yeah.
It's already going there.
Right.
And then if it shows intelligence, you're in trouble.
Yep.
I mean, and so that just takes you further down the pathway of automatically believing what that AI is going to tell you.
Yeah, that's right.
And,
yeah.
while that has fascinating outcomes,
Yeah.
It can be very concerning.
Yeah.
And not concerning in the way of iRobot. I mean, they're going to take over the world. That's not what my concern about that. Although I thought that was a great science fiction take on what could happen.
Yeah.
My concern is more about messing up the psyche of people.
Right.
And too many people are already too loner in their attitude.
Right.
Give me a robot, and I'll never leave my house.
Yep. Exactly.
Conversations.
Yep.
It fulfills a social thing that you don't have to clean up after it.
Yeah. The other thing that's kind of fascinating about that is, you remember there was an old saying way back, I mean, who knows? We may have been teenagers then, but it was, make 3 consecutive guesses correctly and you'll establish yourself as an expert. You remember that?
Yeah.
Make 3 consecutive guesses correctly and you will establish yourself as an expert. I wonder if that isn't part of sort of the shaping and the trusting process that goes on. So if I wonder about what's my experience with AI, if I am testing it to see if what it brings back to me is correct or not based on what I know to be true, and I get 3 consecutive responses back that are correct, do I then immediately make that leap into, well, then I can trust AI? And that may be a faulty assumption.
Just exactly like when I correct a document.
Yeah.
With whatever that grammar corrector.
Right.
And I just look at it and I click yes to every one.
Right. I know.
I don't even think about it.
Yep.
And you got to watch yourself on spell checker because it gives you 3 options sometimes. And if you're not careful, you'll pick the wrong one.
Yeah.
But it is that same effect is because I self-doubt and I know I'm wrong.
Yeah.
When I see the red mark or whatever and they've marked it, I'm figuring, well, it's got to be me.
Yep.
And so I just automatically assume they're right.
Yeah.
Not always.
That's right. And here's another thing that students and anybody that's out there looking at writing anything, I used to, and I still do, right? I still like Grammarly. So if I wash something through Grammarly and it comes back, now it's using AI. Maybe it was using it all the time. I don't know. It's kind of wires and mirrors. But now if it comes back, it'll rewrite something. I'll stand back from it and make the judgment call. Yeah, that really is better than what I wrote.
Yeah.
But then when I wash it through sometimes, as a sample, it'll come back as my own writing has been plagiarized because I went with what AI. It's insane.
Yeah.
So, or it comes back and it pulls something that you wrote from a blog post, a few years ago, and that'll come back as plagiarized. It's like, wait a minute, I wrote that myself. Well, sure enough. So,
yeah.
But this guy that Tom Bilyeu was interviewing. This guy's a physician, and he talks about we are in a phase change. And people are either going to get on board with this change, or we will become extinct. And one of the ways that we get on board with this, according to him, is to allow ourselves to be digitized, right? Where we're basically uploaded everything about who we are, all of our, our DNA, everything. It's uploaded to the cloud, which we know is, a bunch of boxes, in a server farm. So as we're trying to take AI as a separate autonomous entity and bring into the humanness of who we are, at the same time, are we also saying we are okay with allowing our spirit, everything about us, to be put into a server box somewhere? There's something a little bit weird about that. Does that make sense?
Well, of course, this is where it gets. This is where it crosses religion in a really interesting way.
It does.
Because now a Buddhist will tell you that there is no soul, there is no I. So, go right ahead. That you're not doing anything,
right?
However, someone from a Judeo-Christian faith, of course, it is all based on a soul.
Yeah.
From a Hindu faith, of course, it's based on a reoccurring soul.
Mm-hmm.
So, that's a very interesting thought.
Yeah.
Now, whether or not a soul can be stored, but what that really reminds me of, though? I hate to say it, but it reminds me of Ghostbusters.
Yeah, right.
Right. And about just the thought or the concept that they created a storage facility.
Yeah.
For souls.
Right.
Okay, now we're a long ways technology-wise from that, because first we have to discover what the substance of that is.
Right.
But were we able to define it, discover it, prove that it existed, and all those other things? Yeah, maybe we could create a storage facility for it. And were they able to do that? And given that all those other things had been proved, I'm not sure I want mine locked up.
Right, I agree. I agree. Yeah, some of it's too far, for me. I've got enough of a core belief set that says I don't think I'm going to go down that path. There's the line in the sand where you say I can get all the way up to this, I can have all of these questions, but beyond this particular line, I'm done. Because it still comes back to there are some questions that were asked that the consequences of answering incorrectly, in other words, answering dichotomously wrong, right? Yes, and the true answer is no, or vice versa. The consequences of getting that wrong are too great. So it's almost like the Zen sage, and this is where I thought you were going to go with your Buddhism path. Is somebody comes up and says, isn't this wonderful? How great things are right now, and of course the Zen sage says, "We'll see."
Yeah. Somebody
else comes up and says, "This is terrible." Right? This, the world's falling down. Says, "Well, we'll see."
We'll see.
So kind of, threading the needle on that to, not making a hasty decision one way or the other until you get more information, because sometimes we can't understand what the outcome's going to be.
Right.
Or the consequences.
That's right.
So what do you think, Randy? You think have we had enough on this particular topic that we're?
Well, I bet we come back to it.
I'll bet we do too, and I think that's okay.
Yeah,
Um,
I think this one's going to be something that we'll revisit because it really impacts so much of what we do, and I think it's going to continue to impact us. And I think in order for us when we do teach students or engage students, I think that we're going to need to be fresh enough about it that because they're going to challenge us with it.
right.
And I really do want to be able to tell students how to use AI ethically.
Right.
Because I'm not going to, I can only imagine what if somebody told me you can't use spell checker?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I just think that's crazy. You'd never say that to somebody. And I
Right.
think there'll be a time when we'll think the same thing about this. But so how do I tell them to use this and still provide that pathway for them to grow and not become dependent on that? And I think that's what I can't figure out yet. And I think we're going to have to figure that out because I think you're right. It's going to happen and people are going to become dependent on it and they're going to use it. So I think the job of, personally, Frank, I think the job of me and you, because we are older teachers,
Mm-hmm.
and we're not ancient, but we're older teachers. I think it's up to us to figure out this stuff and tell them that pathway.
Right.
Because I think we have to admit at this point, the pathway we took and the pathway we've taught will not be the pathway of the future.
Right.
But I don't think a new person has the information I have to create that new pathway.
Yeah.
And I think I need to work with those news people and my students and help them figure out what this means and how do we make them into those scholars? And I don't mean we don't make scholars, they make themselves into scholars, but how do we encourage that idea of scholarship or learning? And I don't even mean that cheesy word of scholarship. I mean that hunger for knowledge.
Right. Right.
The kind of knowledge that gets you in trouble.
Yeah.
The kind of knowledge that the Catholic Church says you're a heretic because you believe the truth and the world is flat.
Yep.
Whatever it might be, or whatever the new thing is, but we want them to be those truth seekers.
Exactly.
They can't be dependent and become that.
Yeah. Yeah.
But they can use any tool available to them to become that.
Right.
But I guess it's just like when we taught people to do research, you can't just read the abstract.
Yeah. Yeah.
You got to dig, you know?
You know, this is probably a good time, for us to cut this one, but to have this to be continued, because there's enough here, for us to go back, process this, and who knows, maybe we can find somebody else too that wants to chime in with us. We can get, who knows? We'll kind of let the noetosphere inform us as we're bumbling and stumbling along. But it's just like we said with email attachments. I told you before. That was just in my doctoral program. It was in '95, not that long ago, but long enough. And none of us had ever used email attachment. And the professor, because he was cutting edge on technology, said, well, then, you've got two choices. You can either learn how to email attach, or you've just self-selected yourself out of the doctoral program.
That's right.
This is not complicated.
That's right.
And maybe that's the world that we're in right now. But now, instead of the professor telling the students, maybe this is the world, this is the universe telling old professors, hey, get on board or you're going to become irrelevant.
Yep. Wake up.
Right? So, all right, Randy, thank you for your time. And I know we both thank everybody else. If there's one other person that's out there that's watching this, we thank you for your time. You are irreplaceable, and we encourage you to be part of this. Anything else, Randy?
Nope. Many blessings.
Likewise. All right, brother. We'll sign off.
All right.